Kisaragi Academy Class 29, just prior to morning homeroom. I entered the classroom, school bag in hand, and beelined directly for Naomi. From the look on her face, she'd been waiting for me.
Satoshi, ohayo.
Ohayo, Naomi. どうだった篠崎は。
Naomi shook her head.
委員長の家に行ってきたら、一昨日の夜からいなくなってるって。どうしよう。やっぱり何か起きてるんだ。
Her voice quivered. No doubt memories of our time in Heavenly Host were resurfacing for her, just as they had been for me. And my news was no better, unfortunately.
隣の人にも聞いてみたが、物音がしなかったから昨日は帰ってきてないんじゃないかって。
そんな、やめてよ。やだよ。もう友達いなくなるの。
Naomi had her face completely buried in her hands at this point.
さあ、Yoshikiの話だと篠崎が天神症絡みで危ない目に遭っているみたいだけど、あそこはもう存在しないはずだし、どこで何をやっているんだYoshiki、篠崎。
In my worry, I did what I often do when trying to clear my mind and looked out at the window, staring into the cloudy sky. And suddenly, there it was again. There was a solid black spherical object hovering in the sky.
見えるか？
何あれ。
Our homeroom teacher, Mr. Yamazaki, entered the classroom with his usual air of authority.
今日庭先生は病欠ということで3限の英語は自習だぞ。ほらお前たちいい加減席に着かないか。どうした窓の外に何かあるのか？
先生、あの黒いの見えますか？
ん？なんだありゃ。
If even the teacher was startled by this, it must be juicy. Or so all the other students seemed to think, as they began to murmur noisily and get up to see for themselves.
何あれ。いやー。これペンチだよ。
大地震来るんじゃね？ 先生、休校。
Naomi and I looked one another in the eye. We were both thinking the same thing.
サトシ、この感じって。
ああ、嫌味な感じする。このおかんは天神症の気配とそっくりだ。
ほら席に着け。
After classes ended, we took a trip to Polonia Academy High School. We needed something to go on, some kind of clue, anything at all really, so we just started asking around. Eventually, we encountered a girl who was crying profusely about some friends of hers who'd gone missing.
みんないなくなって。ミオさんっていうのね。さえのきなこさんや丹羽愛子さんと仲が良かったの？はい、いつもさやかさんと一緒に可愛がってくれて。
The entire time Mio spoke with us, she was trying to rub the tears from her eyes, and each time she attempted it, it made her ponytail twitch.
何が起こってるんですか？みんなどこに行っちゃったんですか？あの黒いの何？
We'd pledged after our escape not to burden others unnecessarily with information about Heavenly Host, feeling that most people were simply better off not knowing.
ナオさんたちのことを調べてるってことはきっと怖いことが起こっているのでしょう。私なんかが聞いても何もできないのは分かっています。だからお願いです。みんなを助けてください。
She was actually grabbing my shirt now, and the tears were pouring from her eyes all over again.
きっとみんな苦しんでる。
Aiko Niwa, the girl we'd met at Makina Shinozaki's apartment. She'd seemed calm and confident, even a little full of herself, but somewhere deep down I felt there was a chink in her armor, and I think Naomi had felt it too.
正直、俺たちも何が起こっているのかわからないんだ。でも、何か分かったら、きっと知らせに来るよ。
Mio rubbed her eyes again, her ponytail perking up once more, and looked up at us with big, wet saucers. Out of options, we elected to retry the Sachiko and the Ever After ritual. That was our method of ingress into Heavenly Host last time, after all. With proxy doll in hand and my bag of supplies at the ready, the two of us yanked our arms back as hard as we could, splitting the paper in two so that we each held a piece.
ダメだな。やはりいけない。天神賞の呪いはやはり蹴りがついているんだよ。
そうだよね。幸子もいなくなってあの学校は崩壊したはずだもん。
いやあ、水とカロリービスケット山ほど買っちゃったぞ。
I patted my bag as if demonstrating to Naomi how much was in it. It should have been fairly obvious, though, as the bag itself was practically bursting at the seams. Helicopters flew by overhead, no doubt in response to the mysterious black orb that had appeared in our sky. We watched the flurry of activity above us as we glumly left Polonia Academy High School, no closer to any answers than we were before. Glancing over at Naomi, I saw the sour expression on her face and tried to imagine why she didn't want to go back home. And it wasn't hard to think of numerous reasons.
Naomi, 今日もクオン先生のところに行くのか？そっか。じゃあさ、俺ん家寄っていかないか？母さんもゆかもお前のこと好きみたいだしさ。
いいの？
Her expression instantly measurably brightened.
ああ、頼むよ。ゆかを喜ばせてやってくれ。
ありがとう。
We shifted direction slightly and began the relatively short foot trek to my house. It was an ordinary and rather pleasant walk for a while, until Naomi caught sight of her mother turning the corner up ahead. At the time, I didn't realize that's who it was. She was clasping the arm of a young man sporting a shaved head and a construction outfit, with some sort of insignia emblazoned on the back of his uniform. She was clearly very close to this man, cuddling up to him as they walked, pulling his arm into her bosom and even sneaking a few kisses before the pair disappeared down an alleyway.
どうした？ナオミ。
なんでもない。なんでもない。
Her voice had gone up a full octave as she said this. Clearly, something was indeed bothering her, but I had no way to know what it was in the moment, and could only take her at her word. And her word was, by all appearances, that everything was fine. She'd more or less closed herself off, outwardly pretending not to have seen a thing. As we drew close to my house, we slowly began to see a strange light illuminating the area around it. And that area was different than what it had looked like this morning. To say the least, there is now bamboo walls surrounding my home. And most notably, we now had a hot spring.
あれ？
What words are there for situations like this? Flummoxed, maybe?
今朝までこんなものなかったのに。なんだよ、持田の湯って。
落ち着いて、サトシ。とりあえず中に入ってみようよ。
Immediately upon opening my front door, however, we were greeted by a sign reading, "This way to the natural springs."
は
東京都上空に突然現れた巨大な黒い球体ですが、この後18時から防衛省情報本部より発表があります。
We entered the dressing room, only to find Yuka naked.
おかえりお兄ちゃん、ナオミお姉ちゃん。いいお湯だよ。
ゆか
Yuka was holding a toy goldfish, a towel, and a small beach ball in her hands.
何やってるんだよ
That's not the question I should have asked, but I was in too much shock for my words to come out the way I meant them to. And Yuka didn't seem to mind, she just smiled back at me, as joyful as I'd ever seen her.
すごいよ。
Grabbing one of each of our hands, she slid open the glass door in the back and let us into the Mochida Springs proper that we'd just been hearing so much about.
兄くん。いやー、なかなかいい湯だね。
There was another girl already soaking in the springs. A young girl around Yuka's age, sporting a stylish hairdo.
これ会ったことなかったっけ？ゆかのクラスのお友達、水原さつきちゃんだよ。よろしくね、兄くん。おっぱいばっか見ないでよね。まあ、厨房の父なんか見ても興奮しないか。あはプルンプルンプルン。
This character has appeared in outside of the games. I think she was in Sachiko's birthday party, Birthday to You. And she was in the OVA for like a brief millisecond.
なんだそりゃってこらプルンプルンさせるな
It was official. Nothing made any sense anymore.
何が一体どうなってるんだ
サトシ、しっかり。
Naomi had grabbed hold of my shoulders, as if to keep me upright in case I'd suddenly decided to faint, which, all things considered, was probably a sensible precaution.
素敵でしょ？
クオン先生
健康にもいいし、天然の硫黄温泉は霊を遠ざけるのよ。お昼までに作っておいてねって頼んでおいたの。うちの工事事業部優秀でしょ。
何勝手にそんなことしてんの
I pointed my finger at her in an accusatory manner, as was the style at the time.
あら、サトシおかえり。ナオミちゃんもいらっしゃい。お邪魔してます。
Suddenly, I found myself shuddering down to my core as my mom appeared before us, wearing nothing but a bath towel.
母さん
Her skin was bright pink, and she seemed to be in very high spirits. By the looks of things, she was in the spring herself until just moments before we arrived, when she'd evidently stepped out to the kitchen to get a very large number of beverages.
あのさ飲み物取りに行くならちゃんと体拭いてから行けよびしょびしょじゃないか
さあ、みんな飲んで。やー、ゆかちママ最高。
Yuka and Satsuki were also in very high spirits, as was Miss Kuon.
ね、みんなでシャメ取りましょう。持田の湯、竣工記念よ。みんな並んで。せーチーズ、チーズ、チーズ。
Naomi and I were forced into frame as well, like it or not. We are now a party to this madness. This part confused living hell out of me in the Japanese version. I guess it was meant to be confusing. Our eyes were basically pinpricks at this point. None of this seemed even remotely real, and neither Naomi nor I had any idea how to react to it. I took the drink my mom handed me, and without even checking what it was, I chugged down a few gulps. I was thirstier than I thought, apparently.
なんだこれ何味だ
There was a white, thick liquid inside the milk bottle I was given. It had a faint tint to it when viewed under the right light, but like the flavor, I couldn't quite identify it.
この色フルーツ牛乳か
I turned the bottle to read the label. Apparently it was Niwa flavored. Ooh. Ooh. What does that mean?
先生、この度はこんなに素敵な温泉を作っていただきありがとうございます。もういつでも入りに来てくださいね。あ、これうちの鍵です。あら、ありがとうございます、お母様。
Is this a plan to get Satoshi?
母さん。
でも本当にいいんですか？もちろん、持田の湯を作ってくださったのは先生なんですから、年間フリーパスですわ。
母さん。
Satoshi is not hot for teacher. That night, I found myself tossing and turning in my futon. I just couldn't get to sleep for the life of me. So, I tossed the covers aside and got up.
風呂入ろう。
This had been the craziest day I could recall. In this world, anyway. After all the commotion had died down and our many guests had departed, Dad had come home and, predictably, was in the springs right away, with a carafe of his favorite sake. I had a hard time justifying Miss Kuon's arbitrary actions, not to mention my family's utter willingness to accept them. But in the end, I had to admit the hot spring was pretty nice. The rest of my family was all still sleeping, so the house was dead silent. I took off my clothes in the dressing room and slid open the glass door. And there, sitting on the edge of the spring, completely uncovered, was Miss Kuon. My face instantly turned bright red. She was a fairly attractive woman, after all, so being alone with her like this was kind of exciting. Though looking at her now, entirely exposed as she was, revealed to me that this shapely woman wasn't quite as shapely as I'd assumed. Her body was abnormally worryingly thin. She was the definition of God, looking every bit the part of an infirmed elderly woman from the neck down. And I could have sworn I caught a slight glint from the corners of her eyes. She didn't seem to notice me, so I was half tempted to slide the door closed and pretend none of this had ever happened. But no, I had to come clean.
先生。
あら、サトシ君。
Despite the fact that I was a much younger man, and her student no less, she made absolutely no effort to hide her nakedness. In fact, she actually seemed a little excited to be seen this way.
こんな時間になんでうちの風呂に入ってるんです？
ごめんね、起こしちゃったかな。
いえ、そんなことはじゃなくて。ナオミはどうしてるんですか？
うちでぐっすり眠ってたわ。今日もお家に連絡を入れたら、中島さんのお母さん少し落ち着かれていたみたい。
Her mother got some D, that's why.
よかった。
I was legitimately relieved. But I was also having trouble concentrating on the conversation. It took every ounce of focus I had to avert my eyes from the things I knew I shouldn't be staring at.
先生、隠してよ。
あ、そっか。ごめんね。
She immediately got up from her spot and dunked herself in the water up to her neck. Due to its mineral content, this was a very effective means of at least partially obscuring her body.
ねえ、サトシ君こそそんな格好で寒くない？早くお湯に浸かりなよ。
うわっ！
I panicked at the realization that I too was completely naked right now. I covered myself with my hands and could feel the blood rushing to my face, turning me what I was quite certain must have been an incredible shade of red. Recovering as best as I could from that embarrassment, I stepped into the water, choosing my spot carefully so as to put some distance between myself and Miss Kuon.
先生、 今泣いてた？なんかそんな気がしてさ。気のせいならいいんだけど。
時間が止まったらいいのになって思って。
ねえ先生、どうしてこんなことを？ SP の警護とか温泉とか、なんか俺の常識を超えててさ、気になりだしたら全然眠れなくなって。
知りたいのは理由かな、それとも私の素性？
Both would be nice, I thought.
理由はね、守りたいから。それで
守るって何か？
そういえば私の素性ってクラスのみんなには話していなかったっけ？
まあ。
私ね、以前はとある企業の会社役員だったんだけど、会長になった後、どうしても諦めきれなかった昔からの夢だった教師になったの。
You know, you could become a teacher very easily through other means. I mean, it's admirable that you want to teach students. I think it is an admirable job. But if I could be a CEO, I would. So.
企業の会長だからこんなに資金力があるのか。あの飲み物も、それじゃあ先生の会社の庭味って。
うちの商品よ。ゆかちゃんみたいに牛乳かヨーグルトかフルーツ牛乳かコーヒー牛乳か迷っちゃう子が全部の味を楽しめるようにって作ったの。
はあ、なるほど。
これで悩みも解決でしょ？
先生の考え方って理にかなってて正しいのかもしれないけど、発想が前のめりすぎだよな。
I scratched my
どう
head.
したの？
いや、カレーのことを思い出してました。
カレー？
She seemed genuinely confused. I guess to her, the idea of feeding me pre-chewed curry was just another stroke of brilliance, maybe. Not at all something that might keep a poor high school boy like myself up at night.
それにしても、クオン先生って一体いくつなんだ？
I really wanted to know, but couldn't bring myself to ask something so rude of a lady, even if I'm sure she wouldn't have minded. The more I thought about it, though, the more intrigued I was by this enigma. I began shiftily turning my gaze toward her in short intervals, examining her body for clues. Her face had the texture and hue of a woman in her early 20s. But her body was another story. All of her skin was as smooth and beautifully toned as that of her face, but there was so little behind it, ribs fully exposed in every detail. Even down toward her abdomen, I could make out round indentations where her internal organs were practically jutting out. There was no muscle, no fat, just skin and bones, literally. Her proportions just didn't match up with one another. She was like a construct built out of spare parts. I felt almost as if this person soaking before me weren't even entirely human. Miss Kuon suddenly let out a mischievous giggle. Crap, did she catch me staring?
何ですか？
私ね、君たちの副担任になった初日のこと忘れられないの。
My memory there was obviously a lot different from hers. Kuon Niwa wasn't even a part of it. The TA who showed up that day in my mind was and always would be Yui Shishido. Could still vividly remember her tripping on the step up to the teacher's desk and tearing her skirt. She had to hold the rear of it together with a safety pin for the entire day. And even though we were now living in a different reality, A world without Miss Yui, Shinohara, Suzumoto, or Morishige. We had no memories of the alternate events from this existence.
はい。
My mind went completely blank. My eyes were swimming in my head, and I couldn't even see straight from the heat of the water. I had to have misunderstood her.
何がですか？
Miss Kuon smiled widely, and her cheeks turned a rosy red hue. But only for a split second. Then she was back to looking wistful again. Pangs of undue guilt and dread began to well up inside of me. I knew what the next word out of her mouth was going to be. Miss Kuon was almost like a mass of innocence as she spoke that single word. Her eyes locked onto mine and froze them solid. I couldn't look away.
やだな。冗談はやめてくださいよ。風呂上がったらちゃんと自分の家に帰ってくださいね。あと近いです。
I was dumbfounded. I immediately and very quickly got out of the bath and headed for the dressing room. This was all just too weird. I looked back at Miss Kuon, and unsurprisingly, she seemed almost deflated. She was looking down at the water in a state of utter dejection. I turned to face her, still feeling a strange mix of guilt and awkwardness, but allowing the guilt to dominate for a moment.
先生。
冗談じゃないのに。
After saying this, she closed her eyes and turned bright red, and I was pretty sure it wasn't from the heat. Despite her physique, she seemed like a schoolgirl in that moment. I began to waver in my convictions. I felt like I had to justify not returning her sentiment.
だって俺先生のこと何も知らないし。
She twitched a little at this. Had I gone too far? Was I supposed to know more about her in this reality than I actually did? After the longest few seconds in recent memory, her head drooped and a look of absolute sadness washed over her face. I'd never seen her like this before.
しまった。
I didn't mean to hurt her. She had to have known that. But what she didn't know, and what I couldn't really explain, was that I'd only been a part of this reality for a very, very short time now, so I genuinely didn't know anything about her. I tried to think of a way to convey this to her, but my mind kept drawing blanks. It was all just too absurd, too fantastical, too implausible.
先生、
いいの。びっくりさせてごめんね。
She slowly turned her back to me. Part of me was relieved by her acceptance, I guess, but another part of me was still absolutely riddled with guilt. There was a moment of silence, and then Miss Kuon's white waterproof wristwatch broke it with a sudden loud beep. All the sadness in her expression gave way to surprise as the numbers on the watch's display, which I realized now hadn't changed this whole time, began counting down. I felt almost as if I'd been saved by the bell, so to speak, and forced a small laugh, hoping that this interruption might help move the topic away from me.
先生、その時計何？なんか測ってるの？
She smiled.
研究よ。カウントは止まっていたんだけれど、また動き出したわ。
カウント？研究って、ああ、会社の？
そう。
There was something about this smile of hers that was strangely haunting. It would come to leave a lasting impression on me.
さて、それじゃあ私帰るね。今日はサボっちゃったけど、明日は学校行くから、また明日ね。
先生。なんか先生のおかげで、ナオミもユカもすごく元気になってます。
よかった。
多分俺もヨシキも篠崎もありがとうございます。
Thank you for healing my friend's wounds in this strange new world, is what I was trying to convey. And somewhere deep down, I think the sentiment got through.
嬉しい。そう言ってもらえて。私こそありがとう、サトシ君。
With that, she slowly and meticulously waded her way to the edge of the spring,
しゃ
at which point she stepped out of the water directly in front of me.
だから隠してくださいってば。
やだごめん